Okay, we just had a moment of silence for that Burning Man cold open that you burned. Hey, Brad, you know what the first Google Doodle was?
I do, because I just went and looked it up. Yeah, you were talking about Google Doodles right before this, and I said, I wonder if they archived those. And sure enough, they did.
They did.
It's at google.com/doodles. You cannot filter by year as far as I can tell. You can search, but you can't just like, I don't see a way to. Anyway, the point is, it's just one of those endlessly infinite pages. Is there a term?
Yeah, it's an infinite scrolling page is what it's called.
Infinite scrolling page. Okay. Yeah. You just have to do that.
It's not infinite though, is it?
No, but I held the end key for, let's say, 3 to 4 straight minutes.
Wow.
Because they've done a lot of doodles over the years and finally made it all the way back to August 30th, 1998.
Wow, really? It was that long ago?
That was the first Google Doodle. Should we mention the Google Doodles, or when you go to google.com and they've done something festive to the logo for the day?
Yeah, like I remember the first time when I was an early Google user in like the early 2000s, and I went to the homepage because you used to have to go to the homepage to search on Google, and the logo changed. I was like, what the hell's going on here? This is someone has hacked the Google.
Yeah. So I made it to the bottom and saw what the very first one was. And I was like, oh, we should do this for the cold open. And I was like, you're never going to guess what it is. And you were like, what is it?
I said, what is it? Something unfortunate like Burning Man?
Well, no, I said it's way too perfect. And then you instantly said, what is it? Burning Man? It is totally Burning Man. It was the first Man. Like, of course.
See, when you tell the story that way, it's like I burned the cold open, Brad, not you.
Yeah, I mean, if you had guessed that on here, it would have been way better. But
that's true.
The other weird thing is that was August 98, Burning Man. October 98 was Google Beta. So I think they may have done a Burning Man doodle before it was even publicly available as a product.
That makes sense. I don't remember. I really don't remember using Google before I lived in San Francisco, and that would have been after June of 2000. So
I think I might have used it in the college dorm still, which still puts me around 2000-ish before I was out of there. So around the same time, I think. Search engines.
Metacrawler.
Ask Jeeves is always the like joke answer.
Look, man, Jeeves knew what was up. I looking at the decline of search engines and the rise of all these new AI assisted things that are not exactly search engines, and I would say somehow even less reliable search engines.
Yeah, that's right. That's like, the Google Doodles aren't relevant anymore because we're all going to move to Bing soon, right? Because they've got the AI now.
I mean, DuckDuckGo does use Bing, so maybe we are going to all use Bing, and the future is like, man, I just want Yahoo back. Okay, I want a person curated list of websites that are cool.
It is really hard for me to remember these days that Yahoo started as a search engine. It became so many other things, and then like it became a joke at the end.
Nothing at all.
It used to just be a thing you type search into, didn't it?
Yahoo.
Yep, that's the one. Have you been to Bing since they launched the ChatGPT stuff?
No, did they really launch ChatGPT stuff? I've been really busy this week.
Oh yeah. No, yes, they have rolled out. I think you have to like waitlist. Yes, you have to waitlist into it, so you can't just go use it off the cuff right now. They're pitching it as like introducing the new Bing. Ask real questions, get complete answers, and then they show you some like sample questions. You tell me, like you have to be very specific with the prompting, right? And very like complete sentence.
The more information you give it, the closer it gets to what you want.
Because the sample searches they're throwing out here are not like I don't know how you search, but I'm extremely utilitarian and just kind of like large group recipes or whatever, something like that. But this prompt is I need to throw a dinner party for 6 people who are vegetarian. Can you suggest a 3-course menu with a chocolate dessert? Like, it's so complete sentence. It's so like you're talking to a person and not just engaging with an algorithm.
It's much less keyword oriented.
Right.
Like Google over the years has learned how to pluck the keywords out of the thing that you type in there. For people who do that.
Yes. I naturally just started putting nothing but keywords as that.
Yeah. And like happened. I do parentheses or quotes and pluses and minuses and big letters and all that stuff to hone down the thing that I want. I do think that the GPT stuff is going to end up being a skill that is probably useful, but people talking about plugging into search is one of those things that in like 10 years, we're going to look back and be like, man, those people were dumbasses.
Anyway, what else is going on in the internet?
We set up a Mastodon for the content.town residents.
That's true.
Which includes everybody listening to this right now, I assume. You can come to mastodon.content.town and sign up for an account there. We're asking people who use the site a lot to maybe consider signing up for the Patreon if they haven't already at patreon.com/techpod. But everybody's welcome. There are signups on just so we don't have spam. There's still an occasional spam influx, and we're trying to mitigate the impact of that because the moderation team is limited right now.
Yes.
It's me. Basically. And so sign up it takes me no more than a day or two at the most to approve new folks. And it's been really nice. There's a lovely little community that's forming on like the local page of that Mastodon instance. Like, so for people who don't know, you can see everybody that you follow on the metaverse, on the Fediverse, when you sign up for Mastodon. But you can also hit a button that says local, and it just shows you the public posts from people that live on the same server as you. So it's an opportunity for like shared community, for community to form on each individual Mastodon instance, which is, I think, my favorite part of the whole thing, because it feels like kind of like something in between, it feels almost like a dorm message board, right?
Sure.
Like,
okay.
Everybody lives in the same space. We all have the same interests, and like presumably we live in the same town, right? Content town. And
in the future, Content Town will be the only town.
Look, Brad, don't tell him. We gotta keep that part secret, okay? But no. So like when somebody posts a picture of their dog, I see a picture of their dog, even if I don't necessarily follow them, which is kind of nice. And it's obviously it's opt in, but
you know what? Always nice when you're served unsolicited pictures of dogs.
I'm gonna go and tell you, I couldn't follow the Dogs to Dawn tag, which is the one that is just people posting pictures of their dogs constantly because it was too distracting. But I can dip into the local feed and see Ceradar's dog occasionally.
I love the idea that you're gripped with this canine mania. I can't stop looking at these dogs.
There's too many. No, Brad, there were so fucking many dogs. It was just dogs all the way down.
Okay, look, if that's the direction the internet is going, maybe we're going to be okay.
There's cats to Dawn too. Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
Good morning, Brad.
Good morning. I started to say I'm holding a book, but I'm actually holding a sample chapter of a book, but it's in kind of pamphlet form.
Yeah, Brad, we have a guest this week. His name is Marcin Wichary. He's a friend of mine, somebody I met at some conferences years and years ago, but has a long storied history of not doing the thing that we're doing other things that we're not going to talk about today. Like he was the design lead and typographer at Medium. He did the Pac-Man Google Doodle when he was at Google.
Oh, right. That's how the Google Doodles came up.
That is how we got to the Google Doodles. He was not responsible for the Burning Man Doodle, as far as I know.
Okay.
But for the last 8 years, Marcin has been working on a book about keyboards.
Mm-hmm.
The book's available to order now on Kickstarter. It's called Shift Happens. It's a really very good name for a keyboard book.
That's good. We will put a link to that Kickstarter in the show notes if you want to go check it out.
Yeah, but I don't like Marcin's a pretty humble guy. I don't know that he would say this, but given the amount of time that he's been working on it and the level, like how he manages, how obsessive he is about things he's excited about, I think it's probably safe to say, even not having read the book yet, just reading the sample chapter, that this is going to be a definitive work on the history of the keyboard. It
seems comprehensive. I mean, I've only read this one chapter, but it seems comprehensive.
Yeah, he sent us I think it's the second chapter of the book. It's about, he described them as shift wars of the late 1800s, where typewriter, this is before QWERTY was completely locked down. It was a time when the layout of the keyboard was wild, and people were upset that typewriter manufacturers were putting non-functioning keys like the shift key.
He gets into this some in the interview that you're about to hear, but also, first of all, this thing seemed exhaustively researched, and like that's one of the great things about talking to him was we talked about keyboards and typewriters a lot, but we also talked about like the process of writing a book like this. Like, it was also fun to just hear like, hey, how did you juggle a day job with this sprawling work, and like what was the international travel like to go see exotic key, typewriter hardware and stuff like that. But part of that research is, even in this one chapter, there are photos of 150-year-old typewriters in here all over the place. But he even went and dug up old newspaper articles and like a bunch of advertising from the era.
Yep.
And the mudslinging between the typewriter makers of the late 19th is hilarious.
For example,
he mentions this in there, like there was this notion. So just to give a little context to what you'll hear, the big debate was, is the shift key necessary, or should you have a single key on the keyboard for every single character you can produce?
Yeah.
Should you have a shift key that shifts between 2 or 3 different things, or should you have an entire uppercase alphabet of keys and an entire lowercase and a key for every symbol and number? And the people who lean toward the latter, the makers of the Calligraph, I don't know what the name of the company was, they were literally out there saying, why would you want a typewriter with a key that produces no character? Like the shift key is inherently meaningless because nothing comes out when you press it. They referred to the shift key as a gratuitous stroke. Kind of really ostentatious language of that period of time mixed with like advertising level mudslinging. It's just hilarious.
Just the idea that a modifier key is going to be gratuitous is funny to me. Like, oh yeah, here's a key that makes all of the other keys on your keyboard do 2 things instead of 1. No, that's a bad key, man. Yeah,
that was, they made their bet and they had to sell it.
So anyway, let's kick it off with Marcin. I'm curious what it is about keyboards. I've always found them kind of fascinating. I've tried different layouts. I've tried different styles. I've tried splits. I've tried gamer keyboards. I've done the fancy mechanicals, the whole thing. But I mean, do you think there's something inherent to the keyboard, or is it just that it's the way we interface with language now?
I think it's probably that. So I care a lot about typography, and at some point I realized that typography can be like really anything you want. Like it can be the kind of beauty, can be the function, it could be the sort of mastery, it could be appreciation of history, and there's like, hundreds of years of typography history. It could be just like a lot of nuances. It could be like the big idea that we can express ourselves with, shapes. And as funny as it sounds, like keyboards sort of start, maybe I spent too much time, investigating, looking at them, etc. But I sort of feel like this to me as well. Like they've been around for, 150 years, the iteration that we use, right? Like people have been trying to do that for decades, if not centuries earlier. The technology just wasn't there. But, even in this like 150-year span is, everything from, again, the history and how the keyboards serve different purposes, right? They used to be this very professional tool to literally like transcribe, like Morse code, to, us chatting today with our thumbs, which is a very different use case. And sort of like everything that surrounded keyboards technologically, right? They were attached to this huge early typewriters, and now they're all, just made out of pixels. They don't really ever exist. And then there's like the kind of relatively new or new at scale idea of keyboards being the way to express yourself, right? Like how your keyboard looks, how your keyboard sounds, like what switches do you use, what keycaps, what layout. And then there's the whole like kind of mathematics and politics of layout that we could talk about. There's like, there's not a decade or half a decade comes with somebody. It's like, I fixed QWERTY. And of course they didn't. And maybe there's nothing to fix. Maybe there is. So just a lot going on. And there's, the sort of gender issues, the kind of international, like, QWERTY in a way effectively colonized keyboards. Like in a way, like there's the sort of, it just happens to be the American layout attached to the, English alphabet. And it could have gone very differently maybe if typewriters started anywhere or somewhere else. But we all type in any possible language can be expressed now with QWERTY keyboard, right? Which is really interesting. So I think there's, and on top of all of this is just this everyday object that stares us in the face, and there's something kind of interesting that, people are telling me like, I'm actually like, what is there to keyboards, right? And it's just like, well, here's 2 volumes and probably a 3rd one if I weren't careful. So there's just a lot of really interesting stories, a lot of kind of design decisions and half decisions, and a lot of kind of accidents or happy or unhappy, and how this sort of artifact came to be, and the fact that it might be boring. And then on top of that, and I can continue, please stop me, but it's also this beauty of like the human-computer interaction, the way that our fingers almost like bypass our brain to just like do the thing. That whole area is just fascinating. Like fingers just happen to be like extremely good input and to some extent output devices, or output and to some extent input devices, depending how you look at it. That's just beautiful.
That idea is interesting, right? Because like there was a period of time when like the fastest way for me to think about something was to write it down by hand or to say it. And then I learned how to touch type, and that both in terms of like my actual output and my efficiency, but also now the fastest way for me to think about something, if I need to think about what I want to say and what I want to write, the easiest way for me to do is open up a blank text file and just keep typing until what I want gets there. And that like the keyboards literally changed my brain.
Yeah. I mean, there's the whole idea. I think that's technically called transcription fluency, and it's much lower than people think. Like you actually don't need to touch type. I think it's around 30 words per minute, which really is 2 fingers or 2 thumbs, and very casually. Like there's this threshold where typing is no longer a chore for you, at least in a sort of casual way. It's just a thing you do, and then it unlocks this sort of, I can write notes, I can put something to paper, I can just offload something from your brain, I can move things around, because a keyboard, and especially with a combination with a mouse, it's just like incredibly powerful editing tool, right? So you can start like sort of collating your thoughts in different ways, and there's something like really amazing that starting from the first typewriter 150 years ago, the first the commercial one that ended up making the keyboard what it is today, that already allowed speeds like that. So that was sort of kind of miraculous, I think, to me. Yeah.
There's almost something liberating about learning to type, right? Like once you get to the point where you can do it incredibly fluidly, like you can basically produce thoughts or record thoughts with your fingers almost as fast as you can speak them, right? It's almost second only to saying words, how quickly you can get them out of your head and into kind of a documented form. It's really freeing to me once you get really good at that. I wanted to ask, did you run into any kind of like more primitive forms of not typewriters, but other sort of real-time ways of typesetting? Things that would not be recognizably, the modern keyboard or typewriter, but that existed prior to that kind of had the same function while you were researching this?
Yeah. It's actually kind of amazing because, you see typewriters that look like sewing machines. You see typewriters that look like clocks. You see all sorts of versions of that. I think what was interesting about the typewriter was that, even the invention of the carbon paper was like somebody trying to help. I think the story goes, it was their love, and she couldn't see, and he wanted to be like one of typewriter to help her, express herself. There's like another part of it, but basically, I think typewriters always had to wait for this kind of incredibly interesting moment where, if you think of a typewriter, it's both has to be like an incredibly precise device. Like you have a letter that has to go in a certain place. We are very attuned to seeing typesetting being wavy or not aligned. So it had to be aligned in sort of 2 axes and, reliable, and there's all of the ink and stuff going in there. But it also has to, at the same time, be operated with like a lot of force. So it's this delicate device that people are just pounding on over and over again. And so I think this, from what I understand, that's just like incredibly hard to do. and so the very early typewriters, by the way, there were also typewriters with like counterweights, eventually they borrowed the, I think, escapement from clocks. That's the thing that kind of powers the typewriter, gives it this sort of weird combination. And that happened to be like almost exactly 150 years ago. But everything before that, and I think there were at least 200 years. And, as you can imagine, there's always a debate, what is first? And, there's a lot of European countries that claim the first typewriter, and that all makes sense. There's always just a qualifier in front of first that makes it real. But I think the one that we consider, or that I would consider the first typewriter, was first of all, the first QWERTY typewriter. And second of all, the one that actually ended up being mass marketed and is directly connected to pretty much every keyboard we use today.
That's the Remington?
Yeah, that's the I think originally it was called like the Scholz and Glidden typewriter. There's a whole story about like did Glidden deserve the credit, but we don't have to talk about it. But eventually it was sort of a partnership with Remington, and they renamed it Remington #1, and that's sort of what became basically every keyboard. It really took over the market with an astonishing ease in a way that we're still kind of debating.
Was this Remington? Okay, so I have two questions out of this. One is, does that mean we got QWERTY kind of by default because it was the first one that was pretty good? And the other follow-up is this Remington the gun company, or is it just a different Remington?
That's how you know we're both from the South. I was also going to say, like, this isn't no relation to the firearms manufacturer, right?
It is the same company.
Oh,
wow. Or, I don't know, this may be a branch of the same company, but and I think it was in New York State, if I remember correctly. But yeah, so that's actually what's really interesting, which is like, QWERTY was first-ish, and there were, especially, we're talking about late 1860s, early 1870s, and there were immediately attempts to make the layout better, including from the guy who invented QWERTY, because he got sort of frustrated with Remington actually, and kind of like, he was the classic sort of like, I can still make it better. I can, the kind of tinkerer. Chris Scholz. But no, it sort of ended up being, so, there were like attempts to find like, what we call like early, Dvorak itself is much, much later, but, some versions to improve the layout, some versions to improve the mechanism and stuff like that. And just ended up that the combination of, first of all, QWERTY just happened to be pretty good, like for a lot of things, right? We kind of consider this a bad layout today, or at least many people, but it actually ended up, to the extent we can figure it out, because not that much documentation has been left from that time. The QWERTY was actually like pretty well thought out, and it was there to solve a lot of actual user problems. It wasn't to slow people down. It was actually to not slow them down. And it was to support specific use cases, like, typing again, I mentioned like the Morse code communication on paper and stuff like that. And so that ended up being good. How much of it was intentional, we don't know. Like maybe the fact that it supported touch typing, which also wasn't invented then yet. Touch typing had to wait for 20 years. Maybe a happy accident, maybe not, we don't know. The fact that it sort of alternates two hands so nicely. But also Remington was just like really good at selling typewriters and promoting them and combining, if you were touch typing school, we give you a typewriter, but, you have to put the label prominently, or some version of sort of like that kind of stuff, which, depending on how you look at it, is maybe a little depressing, but also kind of like, that's exactly the lesson that maybe August Dvorak didn't learn, which is like making a quote unquote perfect layout only will get you that far. You also have to like get it on market and figure out how it works and how it feels and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so as early as like the Remington #1 happened, there were people trying to make better layouts, better keyboards and whatnot. And it sort of ended up trouncing them all from the very first years, which is kind of interesting.
You sent us a sample chapter from the book about the shift key that had a bunch of layouts from that era in it. Yeah. that was fascinating. Like like there were a lot of layouts that were pretty recognizable for today.
Yeah.
But then there were also some that had the uppercase, lowercase keys kind of encircling each other, ensconcing each other, which was it's fascinating. I never even considered that the shift key was an invention at some point, but of course it was. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I mean, that's like my book is called Shift Happens, which is, partly like a joke. Maybe. I always thought it was maybe like too crass of a joke, but people kind of.
I think you're going to be fine, Marcin.
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry about that anymore. I think you're okay.
I got used to it myself, but it also happens to be this like interesting, like keyboards sort of happen, right? Obviously, people design keyboards and people made an effort to put a certain key in a certain place, but also in a way, nobody was really in control. Things just happened through path dependence and legacy consideration. My joke is like, why is this key on this place on your keyboard? Well, because it was there on the keyboard before that. That's literally the answer for every key. Why is like J that nobody uses right under your finger, right? Or a semicolon so close. But yeah, Shift was sort of like the first battle after QWERTY. And it was interesting because it was sort of like, in a way, technological, in a way, kind of political. The actual inventor of the QWERTY typewriter originally thought, we don't need Shift. Why would you care? Which, sort of an interesting approach. And we see it over and over again in history where, uppercase computer, uppercase texting, and then, there was this sort of, do we need one shift? Where does it go? Do we need two shifts? And I don't mean like two doing the same thing, two doing different things, right? It's an interesting kind of correlation between like the more modifier keys you add, the fewer keys you need, which, a century later you see with a Space Cadet keyboard, the infamous Space Cadet keyboard with like 5,000 combinations. But yeah, they were battling it out in the 70s and 80s. And it was really funny how, and of course there were keyboards without shift at all, right? It was just like uppercase keys, independent, as you said, from lowercase keys, which makes sense. And it's actually hasn't been proven to be particularly bad. And there were, all these ads saying like, why do you pay for a key that doesn't do anything? Or how would you know what letter you output if you don't see it with your own eyes on the keycap? And it's really fun. And it's, this flowery language of the 19th century. And it's kind of amazing. And again, it wasn't as much Remington. That the next big hit, which was the Underwood typewriter, that basically said, we're just going to do shifts, in the lower row, on the left, on the right, so you can use double, whatever finger you want, make them a little bit bigger because fits low requires, the further you are from the center, the bigger area to compensate, for the distance. They just did it right. And they did a bunch of other things right. And that sort of ended up solidifying that layout that we still see today, except, and this is like the funny footnote, and I'm spoiling maybe the book, but if you look at the iPhone, and the Android keyboards, which are arguably the most used keyboards today, right, by typing, they actually have two independent shifts, one for lowercase, uppercase, one for symbols, which was the thing that also happened in the 80s and lost then. So in a way, that double shift layout just needed to wait however many decades or over a century to actually, take off, because that saves you that precious space on the screen for one row, which ended up being much more important for smartphones than it was for typewriters.
I was kind of shocked reading this chapter how much of that technology from the late 19th century kind of predicted stuff that's going on now. Like the Fontana Baby that you mentioned, I think you said has 4 different layers, 4 different shift modes. Yeah. Is that right? Which is like a 60% or a 40% like mechanical with a bunch of different layers in it.
Exactly,
it's like the same thing 150 years ago.
Yeah, some people's like brains and fingers just work like this, right? Like I wanna, like it gets very close to chording, or is it chording or coding? I never said that
chording.
word.
Chording is the yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, coding, which is like we talked just earlier about early typewriters, and a lot of them were based on music keyboards, because that was the only quote-unquote keyboard that was available. In a way, the keyboards that we use today should be called button boards, because they're not keys in a musical sense, right? They're just buttons. But eventually, we realized, like, oh, we don't do this coding very well for typing, because it's not needed, with the exception of stenotyping, with the exception of maybe modifier keys, right? Like today. So, but yeah, I think if you get really adept at coding in whatever configuration, you can move much faster.
Like, so it sounds like the book covers everything, right? From the dawn of the modern typewriter all the way through iPhone and Android keyboards and software keyboards, and like the modern mechanical, like but yeah. I assume both the, you can make a hyper customized keyboard. This is exactly what you want, all the way down to when you buy a laptop, you get whatever keyboard you want, whether it's good or bad. Assuming, like what do you feel like you missed anything? I mean, I know there's always more.
So I think the answer is obviously yes. I think what I understand what's going to happen is the book comes out and immediately people will just like, oh, I have this great story for you. And I'm like, where were you before? But of course, that's how it works. Like, that's kind of even outside of keywords, I think what I've learned in the process of doing this is like, how to chase stories and how hard it is to chase stories. Because, so yes, the book sort of covers the 150 years. Obviously not everything that happened and not every keyboard, because that's impossible. And some of those keyboards are kind of boring, honestly, right? Like there's like nothing to say more than this existed and people loved it. And there was this interesting thing about how do you tell, this 40 chapters in a way that feels coherent? And to me, it was, first of all, what are the stories that I already heard that like, I think they're just really cool stories and they need to happen. They need to be in a book because they're just great. And then there was, what are the keyboards that I need to put in a book because they were important? And if they don't have any stories attached to them, what do I do? Right? Do I come up with a narrative that makes them kind of interesting to read? Do I do something else? And then the last one was, are there people around that I could talk to that might, and that's the interesting thing for me, because people often don't know that they have good stories waiting, right? They kind of like, oh, I just did this thing with this computer, or I did this keyboard, and it's just normal to me. I'm like, what are you talking about? You're blowing my mind right now. Everybody needs to hear this. So there was that sort of what I imagine is more or less sort of being a historian, right? Like, or a journalist or an interviewer, which I'm not. And there's a lot of lessons there. But to give you like a specific example that really, really surprised me was, like one of the stories like one of the late additions to the book that actually just happened last year was somebody posted an Instagram photo of this guy holding this peculiarly looking laser, pointing it at a printed page with his typewriter. Never seen this before. And the caption just said, laser eraser or something like this. And I'm like, wait, what? And so I started digging, and there's like, if you look up laser eraser on on the internet today, there's not that much about it, which is surprising. So
was this a real product?
So yeah, so it was a prototype. So basically, one of the co-inventors of the laser was so fed up with typos that he made this prototype to actually just like remove the typo. If you press the wrong key, you could just like zap it from the page.
Just vaporize the ink. Holy cow.
Yeah. And there's apparently like a way to do this quickly enough so it doesn't affect the paper. And I forgot, it's not that much energy, honestly. It was one of the like early use cases for the laser. And he made a prototype. He actually brought it on TV to show to Walter Cronkite. And he spent like a decade along with like other people at Stanford University trying to bring it to market, and they couldn't in the end because A, it's kind of expensive. B, it was too big. C, people started worrying about the danger of lasers, just like about like 5 to 10 years after lasers actually came to be. People were just like, should we be doing this at home?
Well, yeah, all these laser researchers have bad vision all of a sudden. I wonder
why. and then like kind of IBM, there was two interesting codas to this. First of all, IBM released Correcting Selectric in 1973, which approached the same issue like chemically. They just invented a different kind of tape with film that you could just remove from paper if you did it fast enough through this like other backspace key. And it worked really, really well. And of course, computers came around. And then with computers, the backspace is almost by default, like it's so much easier to lose data than to keep it, right? So that's a given. But what was really interesting about this was this, typing existed for so many decades, and we take backspace for granted today, but there were like 80, 90 years where a lot of typing was just retyping, and it was frustrating because if you made a typo, you had to use whiteout or some other things. And so the laser eraser is kind of like a folly in a way, but it was also like a problem just eminently worth solving. And maybe that's why Arthur Schawlow was his name. He worked so hard to actually make it happen.
There was a moment reading the sample chapter where I realized how much my brain has been warped by computers, because I had to consciously remind myself at some point, wait, there was no backspace on these typewriters 100 and something years ago. But even more, I think it was Underwood, you said. What was it, maybe around the turn of the century or something? Like their big innovation was that they let you see what you were typing as you typed it. And like my brain exploded, because what was it like before that? Like, did you have to like run the whole page and then pull it out to see what you had written?
Yeah. You could kind of raise the platen, I think, or the roller a little bit to peek inside. And there was this sort of beautiful moment. I think, we still have some letters from the inventor of the typewritten, to his friends, and not too many, unfortunately. But there's this one where they're still working on the first typewriter. And he was just like, something went wrong and I typed the whole page and I lost it. And it's very similar to like early home computers where you forgot to save and power crash, or your floppy, you put a magnet on your floppy or whatever. But he's still like, I love this machine. Like he was so into his invention. It's like, oh, no big deal, I just retyped it. So it's really funny.
Oh, that's really funny. So I mean, okay, there's a bunch of different ways we could go from here. I was going to say so one of the things that Andy, multiple mutual friend of ours, Andy Bio, posted your first tweet when you said, let's see, a couple of years ago, you said, I think this was in 2015. You said, kind of feeling I should write a book about the history and stories of computer and typewriter keyboards, ... And that was in August of 2015. So you've been at this for 7.5 years, basically, at this point.
Yeah.
And it's taken you all over the world. I've watched you on Twitter, pop up in computer museums and typewriter museums around Europe and North America and everywhere. And I'm curious if kind of what have been what are the things that gave you the most joy out of that experience? Mm-hmm. And then also, you've been sharing this on Twitter as you go, and I kind of wonder if you've become the guy on Twitter for keyboard stuff now, where people just send you random keyboard info. And if you expect, I expect that'll probably accelerate now that the book is coming out as well. So,
yeah, I think definitely on the second question, yes, I am the keyboard guy. I mean, fortunately, there are like more keyboard people. They're like mechanical keyboard, sort of YouTube celebrities. So there's we can share the space, I suppose. But yes, and I really enjoy it because I think, in 2015, by the way, I actually don't remember writing that tweet. So that's really funny that Andy unearthed it, because I was like, wow, okay. I guess I thought it was a little bit later than that, but maybe like good ideas came coming back and eventually just didn't leave. But I had this idea that like keyboards are kind of like a fractal, right? Like you will never run out of stories. You will never run out. You can just go deeper or connect things laterally or try different things. So, and it ended up being the case. And I think that's like, I wish I had an answer of how I knew that, but I think that's, I like this idea that like, if you recognize that something is a fractal, and you can pursue it, that could be like one of the most amazing things, at least for me, like a kind of a creative / curious person. Maybe I lacked into this one this time, but so I think you asked me about like moments. I think, many, very, very many, like there were some, moments of like on the personal side, learning, for example. On this tweet, I was just looking at it. There's 4 pictures. And when I was sending it, I was just like, oh, there are cool pictures of 4 keyboards. And now, like, asking me about any of them, I can talk for half an hour, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, one has an execute button. One is, I think, is it an Olivetti, or is it just a keyboard that has plunger keys? And then I don't know what the old typewriter is, and I don't know what the one on the top right has like a weird iron cross symbol on it for whatever reason, it looks like.
Yeah, I think it's a teletype. I think it's a German teletype, because in Europe you use symbols much more than words. That's why the execute one is American, because America loves words for some reason. If you drive a car, there's a lot of reading involved. But no. But so there's there's this like professional. It's kind of nice to learn those things and connect them in different ways, right? But I think that the number one thing was just like how amazing people have been in this process for me. Like both people in like just helping out. My original desire to write a book came from, I think, my mom being a librarian and just my whole childhood being surrounded by books and just sort of having this idea that like books are maybe among the most noble things you could do. As an idea, and kind of wanting, really admiring writers in my life and wanting to do something like this. And it turns out that's not just me. Like if you talk to somebody and say like, hey, I'm working on this book about this thing, it was amazing to me how often people were just like, yes, come right in. Like, I don't even care about what you're doing. Like, sure, keyboards, whatever. But like, I'll help out. There was like so many stories of that kind of stuff. And then, the sort of different, finding like different versions of myself, of like people who care about keyboards in some way or the other. And one of the things that people might recognize me from was when I sort of stumbled upon a typewriter museum in Catalonia in Spain, that I was just on vacation. I already knew that I wanted to write this book, or it was sort of close to that realization. And so I researched this where I was going, and I didn't find anything. And I literally just like found a sign on the street that said Technical Museum, and I was just like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. I'm just gonna walk. I'm gonna find it. And I walked for like 10 minutes, and ended up being this one of the most impressive typewriter collections in the world. It was just there. Like I could have missed it like so easily. And I walked in, and I was just amazed. There was just like rooms and rooms of typewriters there. And I eventually ended up getting to know, the people who run the museum. We were just chatting last week, and it's kind of interesting because I'm not a typewriter collector, right? This is not like sort of my version of that, but just being able to see, they collected, all the first 7 editions of Underwood, or all the first 7, and it's something kind of like, oh, now I can look at that and do something different, right? Starting from that collection or from that passion, and so that there's so many stories of just like connections with people that were just extraordinary, kept me going, honestly.
Well, I mean, having a collection like that where everything's lined up and you see the generations also has to be really useful for looking and seeing what was design and what was evolution, and
and it's a certain kind of obsessiveness, right? And it's like, it's interesting to like, I think I'm obsessive in some ways too. I mean, the book's like 1,200 pages, right? And the other photos, it's like, it's a little extreme, and maybe people should be worried about me in some way. But they told me like, we just needed to have this 7 first editions of this typewriter, because that's just how we do this. We need to complete the set. But then you're right, it becomes like a case study, right? It becomes like, oh, they added this key in edition number 3, and I'm curious why. Or they tried this thing in this one model, and they abandoned it. And those I find are like really interesting, those sort of nooks and crannies, these abandoned inventions. It's easy to see the beauty and curse of QWERTY. You could take the guy who invented QWERTY, sit them down to your keyboard, and they would know what to do, because it actually didn't change that much. But of course, there were all of these shift wars and all of these other things that happened, all of these wild inventions that didn't make it. And I think in some of those inventions those are the most interesting stories,
You talk about, the openness with which people invited you in and showed you their exotic hardware and stuff. I mean, that's kind of the thing about people that are very passionate or obsessive about something. It's like the ultimate expression of that is sharing it with somebody else, with showing it off. I'm curious when you talk about traveling, going to museums and stuff, like how, just from a life standpoint, how all consuming is writing a book like this for this long? I mean, were you working a day job the whole time, or did this completely take over your life?
So no, not quite. I took, I think, about a year of work to do this full time. That was particularly the writing part, because I knew for that you need focus. You need sort of uninterrupted, time for your brain to work, whether you're typing or in the shower or all of this kind of stuff. Because I think that's the way it goes, right? But I think a lot of the other things are sort of chunkable a lot more. Like, I can jump into Photoshop to fix a photo in the evening while watching TV, which actually became it's like maybe more hours than writing, but that's not as time consuming. So this was, it was in a way like 7.5 years or however many, because it wasn't a full-time project. but also maybe it kind of had to be 7.5 years because like there was a lot of figuring stuff out. Like I've never written a book before, and I've never published a book before, which that ended up being like its own, set of really interesting challenges with, logistics, paper sourcing, printing, like, the Kickstarter itself is a project, right? Like for whatever project you have, Kickstarter becomes like a second project, and marketing, newsletter, like it just happened that I ended up liking doing a lot of those things. The newsletter became like almost its own thing that I'm very proud of, in a way that I'm now thinking about adding a third volume with like some making of newsletter stories, because they actually ended up being like very personal and important to me. But
you're muted, Marcin.
Oh, sorry. I grazed the spacebar with my fingers, which feels very appropriate. So
keyboard failure. It seems appropriate.
Oh boy, do I have stories for you? But there's a chapter about that. But part of the book was honestly setting this condition for myself that this is gonna be hell. This is gonna be a lot of effort. This is just gonna be hard at multiple times. So I need to like put in an effort to like enjoy it deliberately, to create like little side journeys if I get tired or exhausted, to have like, there was one moment where I just hated the book, and there were many moments like this. And I thought like, I just want to give a talk about keyboards because I like giving talks and it's going to kind of reset me. And so sort of negotiating that's why I think it took like longer. But I think it, like, as I mentioned, like, I think maybe just that was the only option, right? It's just sort of like have this, and not even talking about just like I'm slow to kind of maybe experiment and warm up to things. So for example, the idea that like I would self-publish it, which wasn't the original goal. The original goal was like finding an agent and doing like, a classic like airport trade book, which this book is really far away from now that you look at it.
I think it would look a little different if you'd done that. Yeah.
But, that took me like a year because, I originally thought like, self-publishing is for losers. Like, honestly, like I don't think that now. I do have some beautiful self-published books that were just really like, setting a score. I'm just like, I want to tell my story. Like I wanna preserve my legacy before I go, like all very human emotions, right? But they didn't feel very attractive. But in the process of like talking to people, I learned like, no, like actually self-publishing is like how you make it yours and how you can, it's gonna be much harder because now you own all of these other things on top of writing. You can just like send the Word doc to somebody and just like, wait for a year. But that ended up being important to me. But it took me a while to sort of just go through like all of the steps, like, there has to be a Kickstarter now, and I have to make a video. I don't know how to make videos, and the stress of like now, it's funny, but the campaign is doing really well, and I'm really, really happy about that. But like 3 days ago, I had no idea, right? So there was this extra sort of always like this sort of background stress level of like, what if after 7 years people say, I don't know, I guess I don't need that.
There's always a moment before you put your work out in the world where you're like, I don't know if anybody cares about this. I've spent and I've never spent 7 years working on something. I can't even imagine the added stress of that. I was going to ask if you still enjoy keyboards after working on this so long, but I think it's pretty obvious that you do.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like there's, I don't know what's going to happen next, right? Like I might get tired of this and move on to something completely different. I might always remain a keyboard guy. I don't know. Like I'm leaving this sort of open, on the Kickstarter page. I actually very deliberately say like, hey, I think this might be the only edition of the book. Like, don't wait for like a soft cover copy or some, or a TV show or whatever. Just like, because maybe, but I don't know. I don't want to
Netflix documentary series or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd watch the documentary about Marcin's journey to make the book. That sounds pretty entertaining to me. But
I mean, there's some really interesting people that you would meet along the way that I met. So I think that could be really funny if anybody's listening. But no, I mean, honestly, like there's still like half a year of putting, printing it and all that kind of stuff. So that's my next goal, is basically just like making sure this happens. Like we've done a lot of preparations, including the booklet and test print. We have a printer lineup, but that's still gonna be a lot of work, right? So that's kind of on the horizon for me.
This is a little bit of a swerve back to process stuff, but I've got like 8,000 questions, so I apologize. There's a lot of kind of lovingly photographed images of keyboards in the book, and I'm curious, like when you're going out to museums and private collections, how much care did you have to take handling a lot of that old hardware? Like, did you have to wear gloves for certain stuff, or can some stuff like not be moved around too much? Is it like fragile, or is this all pretty like sturdy mechanical stuff?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just curious about like touching all this stuff and working with it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I used to be a volunteer at the Computer History Museum, which is a great organization in Silicon Valley, and I learned some of that there, including like that your sweat is acidic, and also like we don't know anything about plastics really still, so are they gonna survive? Who knows? But no, the funny thing about keyboards is that like they're mostly not, with some exceptions of like important keyboards from celebrities or early artifacts, like they're not like precious, right? In a way, they were like mass manufactured. There's a lot of just keyboards lying around. Like actually a lot of I ended up with a keyboard collection of my own, and a lot of it was just like cheap purchases from eBay of keyboards nobody cares about it, but I knew they were like somewhat significant, at least for me. So so there wasn't that much really about that, with the exception, which I found really funny. So in my book, I promised myself, like I took the photographic or the visual side incredibly seriously, maybe coming from me being a designer. And I really wanted this book to be text and photos, like in that order, because I think if you just like rip away all the photos, the book still stands, right? You can still enjoy it, but it would be a shame, right? And I think it was important for me for photos to like also participate in telling the story and being interleaved with the book, rather than sort of in a little snippet somewhere in the middle, in a different paper. And so one of the goals and the rules for me was I show objects. I don't show pattern drawings. I don't show like I don't know what would be the other thing, source code. I show objects, right? Like it's important for me, and it could be like either photos of these objects or historic photos of these objects being used, like people typing in the 40s or 50s or whatnot. And there was this one object that was the very early prototype of the typewriter, where it's literally just one key, one type bar with a letter W, with a key actually repurposed from the Morse keyer. And that was the first like sort of like, oh, this could work like this, and it could have a letter and it will swing toward the paper. The one exists. It's in a museum in America somewhere. And that museum was, I'm not going to name them, but they were kind of like, oh, you're self-publishing this? Well, sorry, we don't talk to people who do that. Which was, in a way, I understand, a little sad. And I try to convince them, like, hey, I'm kind of serious about this. I'm not like some sort of fly-by-night operation. What I ended up doing is I hired a person who would do like a 3D render of their photos that looked exactly the same, and I could actually control the angles and stuff. But and in a book, so there's a 3D render of this object that exists, and it looks exactly the same. And I confess to it being a render, but it's the one that I just couldn't get near, and they wouldn't allow me to even put their photos in the book, which, So I think there was this one moment where there was no amount of like white gloves that could help me. But it was really fun to like collaborate with this 3D modeler and say like, hey, we're gonna do this thing.
Well, yeah. Were there moments that you were handling something that you were like, I can't believe I'm touching this particular keyboard, this particular typewriter?
There was actually this museum in Spain where I was walking around and I knew enough that I recognized, hey, I think this is the Scholz and Glidden. Like, I think this is the first typewriter. And I like because it had a label saying, don't touch. And I like very gingerly took my finger and pressed the Q key. And I was like, yes, I'm doing this. I just ever so slightly wanted to do this. No, it was fun. And there were, there were like a lot of keyboards that I got to play with, like, the Data Hand, the Space Cadet. and some of them actually, like, some of them were restored, or like one of the funniest moments that happened to me. So I learned that, and maybe that happens to everybody who's a historian, that like for every keyboard that you think from hearing about it, like the first QWERTY keyboard, the Model M, Space Cadet, the iPhone keyboard, like what are the like most known keyboards, right? That's probably like a few more. Dvorak, they're much more complicated than we think, and then they're much more there's much more nuance, and so there's always this conversation about like what is the worst keyboard ever made, and some people say what would be the contenders, right? Like
it's gotta be IBM PC Junior is up there.
Well,
the Mac Butterfly keys keyboard of the last few years is one of my least favorites. I don't know.
Yeah, there was Brad. What would be your contenders? The worst keyboard?
Gosh, I don't know that I've used a keyboard that I absolutely hated. I only use products that are amazing. I don't know.
Okay.
Honestly, like every keyboard I've ever used, I think was at least like good enough. Like I was using in the like the early 2000s, I was just using this like very generic Dell USB keyboard for a long time. That I bought like 3 of them for $10 a piece on eBay just to have spare keyboards, and like it was mushy and not amazing, but even that kind of got the job done. I don't know.
Yeah, so some people would actually name that, right, as sort of like rubber dome keyboards from the 90s, anything. Yeah. Or, the Atari 400 is one of them. ZX Spectrum is one of them. The incredibly influential but strange keyboard from the UK. But no, Will, you're right. Like PC Junior is like right up there. And I actually collaborated with somebody, Jacob Alexander, who's like a member of this mechanical keyboard community. And he helped me, or he did most of the job. We reverse engineered the signals coming from it and built like a USB converter, so I could get to type on it. So I don't know if that's like method acting or whatever, but it was important for me, like to actually type. And actually, the funny part about the book is like the multiple parts written on various keyboards. There's the part about where the keyboard was made was written where the keyboard was made in Milwaukee in the parking lot. I wrote the PC Junior chapter on the PC Junior keyboard. And so that was sort of like a fun way to, they're not rare, you can get them on eBay any day, but, or typing on a Selectric, which that ended up being this sort of like pivotal keyboard in a history that I didn't actually use before. Those were like, it was important for me to like use them for a while, right? And kind of get a sense of how they actually are. And there were moments that surprised me, including that the PC Junior is like, okay, it is bad. It's really bad to type on. But the story that surrounds it, like saying the story with the ZX Spectrum, they're interesting, right? And it's much more complicated than just like they wanted to cheapen out, right?
Well, and I mean, so you brought to a conference we were at a few years ago, you brought a whole giant sack of keyboards, a PC Junior. I think there was a Model M. There was some weird ergo keyboards. You kind of tuck your fingers in, then just move the tips of your fingers in the general direction of the key. And it was fascinating to get to use a lot of these, because I'd never used a PC Junior keyboard. It was really interesting to get to actually try them for the first time. But like it's funny you mentioned this Selectric, because I'm old enough that my first office job was in an office where we had like a Wang microcomputer that was like a shared terminal thing with four different terminals and like a really nice clacky, mechanical keyboard. And then we also had like a large number of the staff worked on these IBM Selectrics that were the ones with the memory dials. So you'd write in the form letter, you record it to a space on the dial, which I assume was some sort of like early digital prom or something that they were writing to. I don't even know. And then they could hit a button, turn the dial, hit the button, and it would just type the whole letter for them really quick on the IBM Selectric.
Yeah. Do you want to know what the dial was for?
Yeah, I would love to know.
I think if I think of the one, so Selectric was really interesting because there was basically this sort of 30 or 40 years of Selectric evolving. And it all happened before computers, so that's why we sort of kind of don't care today, because we just sort of cut off that time, and it was all in this sort of penumbra between typewriters and computers, right? Which is actually like a very fascinating space. There's word processors that used to be computers. There's teletypes. There's key punches. There's different kind of calculators. There's all of this sort of space, typewriters, computers weren't just like a typewriter with a screen. It was just like a complicated, I spent like chapters trying to untangle this. And I think it's a pretty cool and interesting story. But Selectric was, they were trying to do like a lot of things. One, just being a really good typewriter, but one being computer I/O. They had a Selectric with like extra plugs that you could actually use as a very cheap at the time terminal. And I think the one you're referring to was actually a typesetting Selectric. So the challenge with doing like justification of text and the right alignment of text is that you kind of have to know how many spaces you need to allocate. And particularly when, with regular typewriters, which are monospace, it's a little bit easier. But even then, you kind of have to type it in your head or without typing, count the spaces and then distribute them by hand. That becomes even harder with some Selectrics that had semi-proportional typefaces. So you could actually, there were like 3 or 4, notches. So W was
different
wider.
widths for the letters is what you're talking about.
It wasn't as fine-tuned as, like actual typesetting, but it was good enough for books and for other things. And so I think the dial was to help you calculate all of the spacing as you were typing and distribute it, because that, like we talked about backspacing before, right? There's also like this other manual steps that we don't appreciate today because software does it all for us, which was just like, the distribution of spaces. So it's like, the left edge ends up exactly in the same space and the right edge, that's the hard one, ends up in the same space.
Well, the variable width ones I definitely used early on, but this one used it as kind of a buffer, so you could record a form letter into a space on the dial, and then the machine would just automatically type it for you.
I see.
But there was only one person in the office that could type cleanly enough to get the form letter recorded perfectly on the first try. So it was a weird like pre-computer way of repeating content, which was fascinating.
Yeah, sort of like the mail merge / word processing thing. Yeah, Yeah. So if you're talking about that one, it's actually funny because the whole, we think about like word processors as software, right? Today, like I guess we think of other things, but word processors were not just early. Like I think the one you mentioned maybe was one of them. Like very early computers dedicated to typing, right? With this early memory and the sort of repeat function. And I think it was like maybe a repeat with a pause, so you can like type somebody's name and then continue, right? Or, but there were like, this might have been electromechanical or even electronic, right? But even before that, there were like very early word processors were basically like player pianos. Like there were typewriters with holes and they look like this, literally look like player pianos where, they would just like record keystrokes one at a time and replay them from this roll with holes, which, eventually led to punch cards, maybe not led to, but connected to data how punch cards work, right? So
paper tapes and punch cards and all that, right? Yeah.
So the sort of like word processing Selectric was like yet another flavor of a Selectric that I think that's maybe the one you saw, not the one that I mentioned earlier. Yeah.
There's a photo that I have to mention in the sample chapter you sent of a Japanese keyboard from, I don't think there's a date on it, but it's a kanji keyboard.
Yeah.
That has, I'm conservatively estimating like 500 plus keys on it. I don't even know where to start with. Did you get to try that? Does it even work? I mean, I guess like encoding for other character sets besides just kind of standard Roman characters or whatever, like is a whole other topic of like, would this keyboard even output like text encoding that a modern computer could understand at this point? I don't know.
Yeah. So I think that's its whole, like I have like multiple chapters talking about like scripts other than, English or Latin, because, if you type in Greek, that's easy because Greek has fewer letters than English, although you also maybe need English letters because that's what often happens to languages that like you also need Latin in addition to what you need. So everything becomes more complicated. And then you can go further and further, right? There's Cyrillic, which is basically its own set that's largely not interchangeable with Latin. There's a lot of scripts that have accents. And, the idea of a dead key, to output the accent comes from typewriters. The key was literally like disconnected from the mechanism. That's why it was dead. But then, then you get something like Thai, which is a lot more than 26 characters. But there's no uppercase and lowercase. And and then you enter spaces like Japanese, where Japanese has kana that's sort of similar. It's a syllabary, right? It's syllables, not letters. But, and I'm sorry if I'm not using the language correct. I'm not like an expert in this, but you have hiragana and katakana, but you also have kanji, right? Which is like thousands, or nobody knows how many.
Yeah, I think it's something like 2,000 and change that the government kind of defines as basic literacy.
Yeah, and then you end up with Chinese, which like doesn't even have like the equivalent of kana. It's just the big set of characters that they do. And so, you know, today, that's like the interesting part about QWERTY, that today anything can be input via QWERTY, right? It's just the IMEs, the operating systems help you with autocomplete, with, you know, typing phonetically, typing in some ways. Like I think many languages like Korean, Chinese, Japanese, Thai have like many ways to convert English QWERTY to like the script that they need. It's not autocomplete, it's predictive text now, right? So it's sort of, there's a lot of software in a way to help you out. But the keyboard you're referring to, I think it's from the 80s, and it's sort of only when the software started happening. And of course, that was a really interesting challenge of, you know, not just how you encode all of these kanji or Hanzi characters, but how do you input them, right? If you don't have like software there was a lot of really interesting developments there. Like the keyboard that you saw, for example, like try to attack it. It's almost like a late entrant to the shift wars, because if you look at it, it has 15 shifts. So it's like your left hand is operating the shifts. Your right hand is like this matrix of 20 by 20, right? And each one has 15 legends. So that's the shifts are mapping, right? And, you know, can you touch type on it? No, but you can start learning much faster. But in this sort of, you know, space between typewriters and computers, there was also this Chinese typewriter that actually had what felt like not autocomplete, but like disambiguation. You know how on macOS, if you hold letter E, you get like this little call out that's like, do you want a regular E, E with this accent, E with this accent, E with an umlaut? You know, to listeners at home, try it right now. It's really fun, actually. Just hold any, like A, E, O, U, any of those things. Same thing with an iPhone, right? You hold a letter, you get like more accents. So there was this Chinese inventor who made a mechanical version of this. So they had a keyboard that looked much it was a little bit bigger, but sort of like within a QWERTY size. But then you press a key, and then you had this like little window with 8 options. Mechanically, you would type another key to connect them, right? So you would have this kind of like inverse shift, right, in a way. And there was a way to be able to just like output this many Chinese characters without sacrificing, you know, without sort of like shoving them into this form, because that's what other people try to do, right? Like there were attempts to, do you know what, I think you probably know like a segmented display is, right? Like the sort of LED kind of like pinball machine clock. So there were people who tried to do it for Chinese, right? Say like, oh, we're going to like, Chinese is too complicated. They were all non-Chinese people mostly. And they were like, we're just going to simplify it so it looks like a kind of like a bunch of segments, and you can just like choose the segments, right? And not the best idea, and kind of offensive in a way. But this person was just like, no, they're going to be like 1,000 or something characters. I'm just going to come up with what we maybe now consider like the first input device, not like the keyboard, but like the first more complicated typing input. Again, way before computers. And you see it over and over again, just like these inventions. And like I mentioned before, like they didn't really make it to market for maybe unrelated reasons. But it's kind of amazing that, you know, there was somebody who you know, wanted people in China to be able to type.
So let's fast forward a little bit, I guess. I feel like we should talk about modern keyboards for a bit, because we've talked a lot about a bunch of really old keyboards. Were you into the mechanical keyboard? Like when you started on this in 2015, that was, I don't want to say it was new at that point, because people had been doing it for a long time. And I remember there was a booming market in Model M's for as long as I can remember. But like that was the moment when manufacturing got to the point that you could readily manufacture a small run keyboard that was you'd sell 100 or 200 of, and that was a new thing, I feel like, around that time. And I'm curious if you were into that, or if that was something you were even aware of when you got started on this.
I wasn't into that, and I will confess I'm still not into that as much. I mean, I have a mechanical keyboard. I think it's cool looking. I don't actually remember what switches it uses, so maybe that tells you sort of like where I am on that sort of gradient. They're yellow, if that helps anybody. I'm sorry, it is not a bit. I actually keep forgetting what it is. But so I definitely like met a lot of people who are like really, really into keyboards, right? Like in a book, I talked to like at least 2 or 3 people who are like really into switches, just switches alone, right? So no, I wasn't like super aware, but I think just discovering that space and starting to like understand like what do mechanical keyboards mean to people. And again, this is this thing we talked about earlier, which is, you know, some people are really into the kind of software side or DIY stuff, right? Or really nerd out on like the force curves of the switches, which, you know, at some point, like I'm it's too much for me, but I think it's like really fun to watch, like people making websites, you know, or even like I met this person who made this, he has a better name for it. I think it's a force curve gauge. I call it like a mechanical finger. He has this, like, he built this device to just press a key very, very slowly and then record the output and see, you know, when the contact happens, or is it different on the way up and stuff like that. So yeah, I went to like a bunch of keyboard meetups and met with a lot of people, and it's been really interesting, and it seems still like it's growing, right? I don't know. It's become really hard to even keep track of what's happening in the mechanical keyboard space to me.
I feel like as you see larger manufacturers getting into that space, I feel like the Cherry patent's expiring opened things up a lot, because suddenly more people than just Cherry could manufacture the switches. But it feels like that space is getting bigger and bigger every year, to the point that like now we're seeing laptops with like those low profile mechanical switches and the whole thing on them. It's a little bonkers. The thing that's most interesting to me about that space is kind of the mad science, the people who are taking like 2 different switches and taking the bits that they like out of each one and then jamming them together. And it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Or, you know, or like sort of like resurrecting the old keyboards in some conceptual way. Like, you know, I'm going to take the old Mac keyboard, but like put it in a modern enclosure, right? Or even like unwillingly sort of recreated some of the typewriter work from, you know, decades ago, because, you know, a lot of those ideas are kind of never end, they come and go, right? Like what if shift was analog, right? And then you hold it longer and it like the letter gets bolder or something. that existed, you know. We tried it.
Really?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. Like this was like one of the things that people tried a long time ago, and maybe the technology wasn't there and is there now, right? Or even this whole idea of like, you know, like keyboard shortcuts or keyboard macros, or you know, keyboards for gaming. Like there's this whole, like, it's a really I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting to see people kind of experiment. Yeah.
Well, and it gives people, I mean, it's a personal, this is the way people connect with their computers. So I think there's an opportunity for personalization there. It's funny because it wasn't much more than 10 years ago. I was talking to one of the designers at Logitech for a story I was working on. I think at Maximum PC, but it may have been tested. I can't remember. And I was like, hey, why are there no split? Why do you not make split wireless or split gaming or split mechanical or whatever keyboards? And they were like, well, there's no market for a split keyboard for gamers. There's not enough gamers that are going to care about a split. And I was like, I don't know if that's true. And he's like, we have a lot of market research. And now, you know, probably at Logitech scale, that wasn't true.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it at, you know, we all know people who are making split keyboards that I'm sure gamers are using. So anyway, it's been it's a fascinating, it's a kind of interesting place. And then the contrast with that is the laptop keyboards, where everybody gets the same keyboard whether they want it or not, and that's sometimes good and sometimes bad. I mean, did you talk about like the butterfly keys on the Macs and what a terrible choice that was for 6 years or however long they did that?
I like very expressly avoided that because, not just because, that's been covered pretty well. And I think there's like a lot of, Casey Johnson wrote about it. There's a lot of really fun, interesting writing. But also because there's this interesting tension, I think, about like how much my book is in the present. So it doesn't age poorly, right? And I do have a lot about like the mechanical keyboards and the sort of resurgence of this in the 90s and 2000s and present, because that's just like a really cool story. But I kind of wanted to maybe not get too like modern in that way, because who knows, maybe there's going to be like a development a year from now where Tim Cook goes on a stage and say like, I'm so sorry, we've screwed up. Look under your seat. There's a mechanical keyboard. And then he would do that, right? It sounds very much like Tim Cook. But
well, except for the saying "we're sorry we made a mistake" part. That doesn't seem super
no. But like, so even though like it is like the funny thing about like, a funny and surprising thing is like how boring Apple keyboards actually are, like how little there is. This is like the most maybe interesting Apple keyboard story in history, right? It's like the Apple adjustable, which was this extended keyboard, the split keyboard, adjustable keyboard they had in the 90s. There was like the one interesting Apple keyboard, right? And it sort of died pretty quickly. And honestly, like the most, to me, interesting Apple keyboard is actually Apple Extended, because not for the reasons people think. A lot of people love, a lot of Apple fans are like, this was the best keyboard. This is like the Model M of this universe. But what's really interesting, it is like almost literally the Model M of this universe in all the wrong ways, which is like, this is a PC keyboard. Like it has labels like print screen and scroll lock, right? What are you doing? You're like, this is like the least Apple keyboard ever. This is like Steve Jobs hated that keyboard. Not that matters, but he hated the keyboard for a reason, which is like, hey, I left and you lost your way almost immediately. You made a PC keyboard. You have a control key. Like I tried not to have a control key. Now you have control and command. What are you doing? So I find this like really interesting. Yeah, but no, you're right. The like sort of laptop, like we've never had a laptop with. There are some stories like there are two experimental laptops with split keyboards. There are actually photos of. One is from SGI of all places, Silicon Graphics. One is from Samsung that you could actually buy. So there were some experiments, but yeah, the form factor doesn't really allow a lot of. And then there was the Fingerworks, which is a really interesting keyboard that actually inspired the iPhone keyboard, but it was like a physical touch keyboard. And they made this really interesting thing that you could like swap out your PowerBook keyboard, and if you're brave enough, which not very many people would be, especially today, I don't imagine, right? But so yeah, we never got like modular laptop keyboards for probably good reasons, but yeah, it is an interesting thing. And I think maybe explains why people love those like little portable keyboards they can just take with them, right? And they can use them elsewhere. Can
I steal your Dvorak question?
Go for it.
These are Will's words. I'm reading from the notes. Are you really a Dvorak user?
Am I? No. Oh my God. No. I'm a. This is gonna reduce my street cred. I don't even touch type really well. I touch type with one hand better than the other hand, which is apparently possible. And now I have studies telling me it's perfectly okay. So if it helps you, touch typing is overrated for most people, for you, the audience. But
we're not here to touch type shame anyone, Marcin.
Yeah, it's you do what you have to do. I mean, unless you have issues, with your wrists or your shoulders, of course. And I'm not making fun of that. That those are real and hard and tricky, but a lot of people are lucky enough they can type on QWERTY however they want, and it's good enough because we're not professional typers. Most of us are not, especially not compared to like typists in offices 100 years ago typing for 10 hours straight on like really really heavy keyboards. No, I just never had to learn any of this. I tried to do corded keyboards. I tried to do Dvorak. In a Kickstarter video, I type in Dvorak, and it's like, I don't know if it's obvious, but it was like all memorized.
I thought you were being very deliberate for what it's worth. It looked like you were doing intentional typing rather than movie typing. It's
like there's like an intentional typo even in it just for visual effects. But no. I'm not. I'm not a role model in any way when it comes to typing, and I think that's okay. I met even some of my coworkers; they have like impressive touch typing skills, which I admire, and sort of harkens back to like the speed typing competitions from late 19th centuries. They're fun to watch, but I can't do that.
The speed typing competitions were like, that was an interesting part of the Shift Wars chapter. That, like, people were going on road shows around different parts of the country, showing off, competing with their best typewriter and their best man, because at that time typing was like, it was a job that men did. And then at some point, there's a gender switch swap that happened at the start of the 20th century, I guess. It seemed like, I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of things to unpack here. So I think, I mean, it's funny because I think typing, first of all, typing is kind of impressive when you think about it, right? Like there were very early studies where they said like, the way we understand the brain works, you could only be able to type like 40 characters per minute. And we actually type a lot faster than that. So there was like a discovery for us that the sort of a combined power of, as we talked about earlier, like the fingers and the brain is just like actually incredible. And then the fact that you can, you don't have to look at the keys. You can actually talk to somebody when typing. There's like, it's parallelizable, right? So like the one thing that's going to sound funny but some people might find themselves, I have like blank keycaps because it just makes me look cool, I think, even though there's nobody here to look at them, but like, it's just kind of cool to like recognize it's like, oh, I've done this enough that I don't need labels. And so, seeing somebody type really fast, and especially with typewriters, there was also this whole like visual, like you put in the paper, you do carriage returns. You can also get like really good at that. And it's really incredibly impressive and fun to watch like the paper, like the last page of paper didn't even hit the floor when you're already typing on the next one. It's just like something sports-like, and similarly to, but maybe more abstractly when you watch like people playing StarCraft, right? Where you have like incredible APMs or whatever that's called, where like you don't actually understand what's going on, right? Where people are like, what do? In order to just stay in rhythm, they just press keys that don't do anything, so,
kind of phantom inputs that don't do anything just to keep their fingers moving.
Yeah, which is like amazing, right? In a way. So there's still stuff, there's still websites that you can type quickly and people cheer you on. So it's kind of interesting that like, it used to be just for selling typewriters, of course, or even selling particular genres. And now it's just, I don't know, for fun or bragging rights. My YouTube is all about that, of course, because the algorithm knows who I am, and I see those over and over again. But you also mentioned something like the other thing that I think is important, and it was important for me to put in a book, which is this whole relationship with like gender and all of that, and that depends largely on country, right? But like if we limit to like America and the West, quote unquote Western world, there was this interesting thing where typing was very female up until like 1970s or 80s. There were, all of these women in offices just retyping what their bosses wanted, typing and mostly retyping, right? The same thing over and over again. And, in one way you could see it as a, some version of quote unquote emancipation, like getting women in the office for the first time, right? Like not something that existed before. But, there was not that much like upward mobility. Very, very quickly that was closed off. It was just like mindless. And then eventually you would like be sitting down in a sort of like dungeon underground sort of typing, and typewriters were replaced with video display terminals. They were much, well, I don't know if they were much less pleasant. They were unpleasant in other ways because, we like, as always, like we care more about ergonomics, the more people are affected, like earn more money, right? When journalists are affected by quote unquote RSI, historically we cared more than before. And you see this sort of fascinating transition moment around the 80s when home computers came around, and those home computers were also, largely put in offices because it's the same technology. And you see in all of these advertisements, this manufacturers very, very rapidly trying to re-establish typing as something men could do. Like you're not gonna be, there's like this I have a gallery in my book of multiple photos of somebody, like a guy typing and a woman looking in the background, like sort of like, yeah, you're still my man. You're like, you like, I still, respect you, even though you're typing now. There was this very concerted effort to kind of reestablish typing as something that is not that particular gendered, which, yeah.
That was the thing. I experienced that when I started working in the early 90s. The women who worked I worked in a congressman's office. He'd been serving for 30 years. He was old. His staff had been there for a long time. And some of the women who worked in the office were like, "Hey, what, you know how to type? That's weird." Which was shocked me. It never even occurred to me because I grew up with computers.
Yeah.
One of the other things that struck me as I was thinking about this topic, Marcin, and talking to you, is that we had 120 plus years where precision got better every new generation of keyboards. They were getting more precise. You could go faster. You could backspace. You could have cleaner results. Mm-hmm. And then software keyboards started in like 2007, and we immediately stepped back. Like it seemed like 3-4 generations there. Do you feel like? Do you feel like we've reached a pinnacle with software keyboards, like on the iPhone and Android phones, or you think that there's room to improve? Like, is ducking just a thing that's going to happen for all eternity?
It's a really good question, and it's a really good question, and still like work in progress, right? Because I actually feel like this is more anecdotal evidence than me interviewing people, but I feel like the iPhone and Android keyboard. Well, I actually only use the iOS, so maybe I should talk about that. It's gotten worse too for me. Like it's sort of, it sort of randomly capitalizes. Like, I don't know. I would feel like, I actually feel kind of disappointed in like software keyboards, because I think in 2007, there was this great effort to actually make it happen. Right. And like pretty well documented in some books and stuff. And it was like generally, I think, impressive, like how much the keyboard would help you out, understanding that like, hey, this is like much worse than keyboards that came before. Of course, what happened was people got like much better at thumb typing, right? So there's like one thing, much better than anybody suspected. It always happens. But yeah, I feel like today, like I'm seeing, like I would have expected keyboards to go like much better than where they are right now, in sort of learning my patterns and in understanding what I'm doing. And it sort of feels like I'm finding with the keyboard much more than I used to. And the sort of software, I'm curious actually if you have an opinion here, like the kind of like the revolution of like Apple added like software keyboards that you could install on your own, but it like never felt good. It always feels kind of slow and blinky.
Second class.
Yeah, it's like an iframe, like if that makes sense to anybody, it sort of feels like, yeah. And then, and that like never really, I don't think that ever went anywhere, right? Like I think some of those, the most popular ones got bought out by, I don't know, bigger companies or just folded because there's like no market for this. So yeah, I'm a little sad about like how we never got, like where I think we could have been in 2023.
Yeah, it feels like consistently I'm finding the same mistakes over and over again, like getting periods instead of ends, or ends instead of periods, or ducking is the classic example, but maybe my language is more colorful than yours.
Yeah, I actually feel like I don't know, and this is another thing. It's really hard to. The release notes for anything that Apple does are like a whole different story, right? But like, I wish we got to know what's actually changing, because I feel like, for example, since like a few years ago, I think Apple is now trying to the Apple keyboard is trying to autocomplete in all of the languages that I have selected as options, right? In Polish. Unfortunately, I have like 15 test keyboards because that's my job. So now I get like auto completions for like many languages I don't even understand. So that I might have sort of put myself in this situation. I just wish that was explained somewhere so I would know if removing those test keyboards would help me. Or there's still this like very strange issue where if you start typing really fast, something very strange happens at the beginning. And that's been unsolved for like 10 years in a way that like feels a little sad, but maybe just to me.
No, I think that mirrors my experience. It's weird because everybody has the same anecdotal experience, and I guess when you add up enough anecdotes, maybe somebody maybe we should just go make a keyboard. Maybe that's the right solution.
Well, I would love to actually. I think I made a keyboard as a joke once that output like one character, and then of course 10 other people had the same idea. But no, I mean, like, again, I would love that, but like, I don't want my keyboard to be like a blinking iframe at the bottom that feels like that's like, make me feel like, like you said, first class citizen, and I will experiment. But like, I don't feel like Apple would. I think they did it begrudgingly, right? Like, I think they did it because Android had that.
I think the integration has gotten, it definitely had ups and downs over the years. I used different keyboards for a long time and eventually just switched back to the iOS keyboard because Google kind of abandoned theirs and Microsoft's got weirdly janky, and Swipe and all the other interesting ones got bought up, as you said. And it's a weird space for something that you use so much is, I guess where
it's in this strange opposition to this sort of mechanical keyboard universe where I think you see so much variety and like almost like extreme quality in some places. If you want to spend money on a keyboard, you can buy like a whole metal keyboard for like, just or wood, like with a keyboard made out of wood enclosure that's just like beautiful. And in software, it's just sort of like you just like lock your doors and drive a little bit faster,
I think that's it.
I was going to throw out since just talking about anecdotes from software keyboards, I have an elderly family member who's very prone to fumbling into the return key mid-sentence a lot, and they don't care enough to go back and fix it. So a lot of their text messages read like poetry because it's just a bunch of like truncated phrases. Anyway, the last question, I apologize, I don't think we asked this. Like, what's your daily driver? If you could only type on one keyboard from now on, would you be able to pick one?
Oh my God. No, it's always hard. So I have this, it's okay to name it? Hex Gears Gemini.
Yeah, you can name, we don't have any laws here. It's a podcast. You can do whatever you want, Marcin.
Yeah, it's, like, I think what's important for me is just like, the format. I have the, I think what people call 10 keyless, no numpad. I have, as I mentioned, like nice keycaps that are blank, but also they're in a profile from like the 1970s terminals, partly because I just like them and partly in like appreciation of the history of the keyboards. So I like this one. It's wired. It has lights, but I don't use them. If I could continue typing on it, I would be pretty happy. But it's funny because I want to see what's next too. Like I think that's the fun part about the mechanical keyboards is that there's like so many strange experiments, so many like extremely clicky, super unclicky, extremely heavy, like weird things. Like I wanna buy more keyboards just to like experience them, right? Just to sort of play around and see what resonates with other people, even if it doesn't resonate with me. So I hope I don't have to pick one, if that's okay. I'm also just curious what Apple is gonna do. Like, I mean, hopefully they're stop experimenting for a while, but like the whole touch, we didn't even talk about the touch bar because that's a keyboard too. That's even worse than the butterfly. Anyway, like I, on one hand, I don't want them to do anything ever again with keyboards because, boy, what a track record, right? But also like, it would be interesting to see what's next, like with laptop keyboards, right? Or there's this whole space, if you rewind back to people like Doug Engelbart in 1960s, this sort of idea of if you have one hand on a keyboard and one hand on a mouse and now trackpad, like that's where like really amazing things can happen. And we kind of haven't gotten there, and maybe we can't, at least not in the way Engelbart envisioned, because he was, incredibly professional. He had the key set, it was just like there are anecdotes or stories I had from the book that it was actually really pretty awful to use. The demo in 1968 was amazing, but it was even worse than the iPhone demo, which is just like they just put it, only one person could do it, right? And it worked perfectly well and nobody else could. But, there's something beautiful about this like pointing device. And I know I heard that Apple's experimenting with like touch screens now, maybe. there's going to be touchscreens on MacBooks. So I'm curious where it's all going to go, because might be someplace interesting, although I don't know if it's Apple who's going to get us there, or Microsoft for that matter, or Google.
The thought that the modern keyboard is maybe another evolutionary dead end on the tree is fascinating. Marcin, thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you.
Where can people find you? I feel like we used to do Twitters here, but maybe not so much these days.
I guess I'm still on Twitter, but I'm on Mastodon. I'm on anywhere. I have a website. What is the right answer here?
What's the website?
Oh, website. Well, okay. These days, my website is shifthappens.site, which is apparently a domain. So there you can, find other. That's like the thing for me right now is the keyboard book. So that's the website for a keyboard book. It's actually really fun. There's some interactive things. There's some experiments. There's gonna be more. I'm gonna release more in February. Just like fun little interactive things, because I love that. There's like some 3D stuff. So yeah, check it out. And then there are links to how to message me and where to find me elsewhere on that site.
And the book is on Kickstarter for the next 27 days or something, I think. By the time people hear this, will be 25 or so. So
that's correct. Yeah, the campaign just started 2 days ago. So we still have like 25 days to go. So yeah, check that out too, and click the buttons if that's exciting to you.
Can I just say your design background is evident on this website? It's a very visually appealing website.
Oh, thank you.
Nice shade of orange.
Well, I was going to say, we talked about it a little bit in the episode, but this is, you don't know that you're going to do other editions of this. So if you want to get the book, if you want to have the book, this is the time to get it, because it'll be presumably difficult to find after the Kickstarter ends.
Yeah, even if I ever do another edition of this, which I'm not promising, I'm really not promising that there won't be one like this, right? I think this is the edition with a really nice slipcase with the third volume that we added as a stretch goal. So it's just I hope it's fun. I hope it's like a really nice artifact, and if you like the stories, there's a lot more of that there.
Thank you so much, Marcin. We'll put links to everything in the show notes, but it's been wonderful having you. And I'll have to have you back after the book's out, and we can talk about how that. I'm curious, as we talk to people who make stuff occasionally, and like I kind of want to hear the story of the book separate from the story of the keyboards at some point.
Yeah, that's a whole journey of getting it printed and stuff. That's still in front of me mostly.
Thank you so much, Marcin, for coming by and telling us about the book. The book is Shift Happens. You can find it at shifthappens.site. There's a link to the Kickstarter there. I ordered my copy. I'm excited to have it coming sometime this fall, hopefully. I can't wait to I can't wait to learn more about the keyboard. Frankly, I use it every day. I try not to fetishize computer hardware, but I feel like the keyboard is the one place where I'm a little dangerously close.
I think that ship sailed already. If you look at the range of once the hardware starts looking like candy, I feel like the fetishism has fully taken over, and there's a lot of keys out there that just look like chiclets.
Mine is I'm restrained. I have a simple blue and white with silver keyboard sitting on my desk. There's nothing tasteful. The lighting is discreet and cool. Maybe
a bit cold and austere, but I can get behind it.
I mean, the rest of the desk is cluttered enough that it warms up the whole thing.
It's the one bastion of order.
Yeah,
in a desk of chaos.
I gotta say, Marcin talking about his terminal keys keyboard makes me think, man, maybe I should build a terminal keys keyboard with those, because they're those round edges with the kind of cupped tops. Oh, it's such a nice. I haven't had one of those since in a really, really long time, and I'm kind of tempted.
Some of the photos, even in this one sample chapter of stuff, like especially the stuff from kind of 70s, 80s period.
God, the Olivetti with the conical keys and this round tops. Oh.
And also just the color scheme on that thing. I mean, this is not great without people being able to see the picture, I guess, but it's like the entire typewriter, or is that a typewriter or teletype?
I think it's both? A teletype. I can't remember.
Might be a teletype, but it's the whole thing. The whole thing is basically white and with green accents. Like
it's very Italian.
It's very stylish.
Yeah, there's a period of time when Olivetti was designing keyboards where you can just look at it and know, oh right, that's one of theirs, because they're the only ones that were crazy enough to make keys that were this shape. But again, the website is shifthappens. .site. I'm super stoked for Marcin. I'm glad his Kickstarter is going well.
And also just like cannot say thanks enough for coming by and talking to us. Like that was such a great conversation. I could have talked another 2 hours to him and asked him more and more stuff about this subject.
Yeah, I feel like once I have the book and I have time to read it, I kind of want to bring him back and have him tell more stories, because there's like he has fantastic stories about keyboards and his travels and learning how to make learning how to make the book. Like he started this whole thing he's not a journalist, he's a designer, right?
The ups and downs of getting this book made, that dastardly museum that would not let him.
I want to find those people.
Even use their photographs. Like, really?
Yeah, what jerks. Well, they're going to feel goofy. Anyway, you know who else I'd like to thank in addition to Marcin?
Who's that?
Our patrons, Brad.
Oh, yeah.
Without whom we wouldn't be here right now.
That's right.
So thank you, patrons.
Thank you. Thank you, patrons.
As always, we'd like to thank all of our patrons. A reminder again, if you're a patron or not, check out the Mastodon. It's mastodon.content.town. It's available for everyone. It's funded by patrons, just like the show. So if you like the Mastodon, consider checking in for the Patreon too. But we want to thank our executive producer tier patrons today on this show right now, including Nick Johnston, Paddle Creek Games Makers of Fractured Veil, Andrew Slosky, Octothorpe Bunny Crimes, Just Wedge, Joel Krauska, Twinkle Twinkie, David Allen, and James Kamek. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate you each and every one.
Yes, we do.
And that is going to do it for us this month.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to come away from this podcast staring with some amount of shame at this Apple keyboard in front of me. I feel
look, I don't know. It was a lot of restraint for me to hear him say, really the only company I can think of that makes terrible keyboards consistently is Apple. Mm-hmm. And like the fact that in Marcin, a noted keyboard expert's mind, the Apple Butterfly keyboard isn't even really noteworthy because he just assumed that the Mac keyboards were going to be bad. It's really telling. It's a scathing indictment, I think, of the entire state of the Mac keyboard ecosystem, Brad.
Look, man, it's not the keyboard, it's what you type on it.